Hello, I'm Mary Elizabeth Elliott from CADCA, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. Thanks for joining us today for this program, The Sobering Consequences of Underage Drinking. Our society treats drinking alcohol as a social activity. Some adults have a drink to unwind after a busy day. Our kids see this behavior and advertisements linking alcohol to having fun. But serious consequences can come from underage drinking. The most recent Monitoring the Future results show a continuing downward trend of alcohol use among high schoolers over the past 2 decades. But even with that good news, alcohol is still the most widely used drug among youth. 9% of 8th graders, 23.5% of 10th graders, and 37.4% of 12th graders reported that they used alcohol in the past month. Those numbers are still much too high. Today we're going to talk about the latest trends in underage drinking, some of the consequences that can come from it, and what we can all do about it. 3 people are with me today to talk about what we can do to make the numbers go down even more. Bob Brewer is an epidemiologist and is the leader of the alcohol program at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
Kara Graveman is a prevention specialist and is the executive director of the coalition Action for the Betterment of the Community in Sturgis, South Dakota. And Sean Briscoe is a sergeant with the Sturgis, South Dakota Police Department. He is actively involved with Kara's coalition. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for being on the program today. Let's start briefly by discussing some of the trends in underage drinking. Bob, I know alcohol is still the most widely used drug among youth. Why do kids drink?
Well, predominantly, Mel, I'd have to say kids are drinking to get drunk. We know that over 90% of the alcohol that is consumed by underage youth is when they're binge drinking. And so for a lot of young people, the message that they've gotten from society is that drinking is not only an okay thing to do, but is an important part of having a good time. And unfortunately, in doing so, they put themselves and others at risk of a lot of problems.
And are the stats the same roughly for boys and girls?
Well, what we've seen over time actually is that there's been some improvement in drinking, and let's say specifically binge drinking for males. If you go back, for example, to about 1991 up to the present, some improvement for girls, but much less so. And what has generally happened is that the drinking rates for boys and girls have started to converge. And based on some of our CDC statistics, about 1 in 5 high school students, boys and girls, drink to get drunk or report drinking to get drunk in the past month.
You know, we talk a lot about the science of the brain and how alcohol might affect the teenage brain. Can you share with us a little bit about that impact, Bob?
Well, alcohol has a variety of different impacts on adults and on youth. But you're right, the period of high school and before is a time when young people are particularly vulnerable to the effects of alcohol. The brain is changing very rapidly, and yet some of the centers in the brain that control impulse and other activities are not so well developed. So when you add alcohol to that mix, you not only can have long-term effects on the development of the brain, but really increase the risk of harms in the short term as well.
So it's important for us to give those messages out for our coalition leader as well.
Absolutely.
So what about binge drinking? We hear about binge drinking a lot. What is the definition of binge drinking, Bob?
Well, binge drinking is basically drinking to the point of acute intoxication, and we would define it as 5 or more drinks within a short period of time, within an occasion for a man, 4 or more drinks within a short period of time or an occasion for a woman or for a girl. And in fact, actually, because young people are more vulnerable to alcohol consumption, really the cut points for binge drinking are often even lower for young people. But it's really drinking to that point of acute impairment or drunkenness. And that's the pattern of consumption that is by far the most common for young people and for adults as well, those who are drinking too much.
And why do we think that binge drinking is such a concern? What are some of the major problems that are associated with binge drinking?
Well, overall, Mel, we estimate there are about 88,000 deaths due to excessive drinking in the United States each year. Over half of those are due to binge drinking. And we estimate about $224 billion in economic costs due to excessive drinking in the U.S., and that would be both youth and adults. And about 75% of those costs are due to binge drinking. So you've got a range of different problems, both short-term problems and long-term problems that are related to binge drinking. Some of the ones that people often think about that are particularly important for young people would be motor vehicle crashes, violence, suicide. But then you've got a number of problems that can develop over time and that can start during teenage years and young adulthood and then can continue on through life. That can include heart disease and cancer and stroke. A lot of problems that people may not think of as being due to excessive drinking and specifically to binge drinking, but that really are.
Thanks, Bob. Well, Kara, we've heard the sort of the national picture. Is this what you're seeing in your community?
You know, Sturgis, South Dakota is a town of 6,500 people. So predominantly we are very rural compared to a lot of other places. I would say statistically our rates for 10th graders are higher than the state and the national rates. We're running about 37% for our 10th graders right now have drank in the last 30 days. We also have a pretty big event that happens every year is the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, which impacts our town of 6,500 and brings in around 500,000 people for that week. Locally, there's a lot of retail involvement, there's a lot of parental involvement with parties. We were just successful in passing a social host law in the state of South Dakota, which has not really been implemented for a year yet. We had our first case that was tried in a neighboring county with a young man that was brought up on 21 charges of social hosting to minors under the age of 18. Wow. We also have a lot of young men and women that kind of, instead of going off to college, they work locally, providing substances for youth to drink under the age of 18.
Well, Kara, it's so important for the coalition leader to really understand their community, and it's clear that you really do know your community well. Sean, where, as a law enforcement officer, where are you seeing young people drinking? Where are they drinking?
We're seeing it a lot with school occasions, sporting events, graduations. They'll tend to congregate together after those type of incidences, right. And we'll see a lot of drinking there.
So social gatherings, do you know in advance, sort of you can anticipate where folks are drinking, or sometimes you're surprised?
Oh, we get surprised, definitely. You know, we have the normal places where kids choose to hang out and where they want to go that we'll keep a pretty close eye on. But kids being kids, they get used to that, so we got to kind of adjust and look around, and we're starting to find more of them that are going to residences now to have their parties instead of the old gathering places that they used to out in the county hang out in.
So we're talking about where they're drinking and how are they getting access, Bob, to alcohol?
Well, a lot of times they're getting access to alcohol from adults, and it may be parents, it may be older siblings, but at least in some of the different surveys that we've looked at, that's typically the most common source of alcohol. There are certainly situations where young people are able to directly purchase alcohol from retailers as well. And I know we'll be talking further a little later on about some prevention strategies, and I think looking at access to alcohol in retail settings is certainly very important. But overall, the most common source of alcohol for young people, at least based on what they tell us, are typically adults, and it may be parents, it may be siblings or friends. And I wanted to also, if I could, very quickly pick up on the point about where kids are drinking, because by and large what we hear kids tell us, again in surveys, is that they're drinking in other people's homes, often in the context of parties or in their own home. And I think parents sometimes may have the misimpression that it's safer if their kids drink in their own home, and may even enable their doing so, not realizing that they're really sending a message that drinking is an okay thing to do.
We talk about surveys. So I'm curious, do we think that young people are being truthful on those surveys? We can really take that data to the bank?
Well, I think they're being partially truthful. I think the tendency with alcohol consumption, and this is honestly true both for adults and youth, is for people to underreport their drinking behavior. And we've looked at comparisons between what people tell us they do in terms of their drinking and alcohol sales, for example. And on a good day, even with adults, we may be getting only about a third of what is actually being sold and presumed to be consumed based on what people tell us. So we know there's significant underreporting, and yet we still are talking about close to 1 in 5 high school students who are reporting drinking to the point of intoxication in the past month.
So Kara, how do you get your local data?
What we have decided to do with the implementation of a Drug-Free Communities grant was to secure a local grasp of our data, to make sure that we were also not looking at only the Youth Risk Behavior Survey as a state model, but to really be able to separate our local data and what's going on locally versus the state and the nation. It allows us to really look at programming, different environmental strategies that need to be implemented, ways to really look and steer the coalition in the direction that we need to take.
And how important is the relationship that you have with law enforcement in getting that local data? Do you look to law enforcement? What kind of data do you see there?
I would say our local school district is also a big important piece for us. They provide the youth to allow us to survey the youth in the school system. Law enforcement provides us with their monthly saturation patrol reports, DUI checkpoint reports, any juvenile interactions they've had. And so each month we not only secure their reporting mechanism they use for the city, but we're also able to secure any interactions from a seatbelt ticket to headlights to any other fighting or interactions law enforcement has had with local juveniles in the area.
Sean, let's talk about some of those interactions that law enforcement might have with teens. How do you guys intersect?
Oh, you can run into, especially now during the summer, any number of ways. Like I said previously, a lot of times is after social events, football games, things like that. But now during the summer, we have, a lot of kids that don't have jobs. They just graduated. They're not really going anywhere. They just will kind of congregate in a typical area and just hang out, and we end up having a lot of problems from that, vandalism, fights, and even consuming alcohol down in these areas. So we try to keep, especially with the saturation patrols that ABC pays us to do, we try to keep officers down in that area, and when we get the large groups of kids gathering, we'll keep officers down there and drive through, and that'll generally disperse them and just kind of stay with them and keep an eye on them. It tends to keep them behaving. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, this whole program we're going to be talking about the consequences, what you all are seeing locally, what we're seeing nationally, and what we can do about it. We're also going to talk about how we can stop the flow of underage drinking, and parents have a big influence. And that's the focus of the Talk They Hear You campaign from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So let's take a look at one of their public service announcements.
Trisha's having a sleepover tonight. Can I go?
I wonder about Lucy's friends. What should I say? I know you're only 10, but one of these days a friend will offer you a drink. And alcohol at your age can lead to so many things, none of them good.
So can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me
I
something.
finished my homework.
Bigger promise. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you. Your real friends won't care. Deal?
Sure.
Really?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov, a public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
So what did you guys think of that PSA? How do you talk to your kids about the dangers of alcohol? Kara?
I've been in my position for 10 years, and I find myself, it is a difficult conversation to help parents have. We tend to put a lot of this discussion off on schools, I think most times, where we want schools to educate our kids on the dangers of substances, where as parents, I think sometimes we're afraid to initiate a conversation about that. When we have these discussions at a younger age, I think it sets our kids up to deal with these situations, these pressures, as they get a little bit older in a non-threatening manner with their friends. With the more often and the more comprehensive this discussion can be, and the more natural this conversation can be, and not as a result of something that has happened, I think it allows parents to have an easier time navigating where to go next.
Bob, what did you think of the PSA?
I thought it was a good discussion. I think teaching kids refusal skills can be helpful so that when they are confronted with situations where their peers are trying to encourage them to drink, they have some idea of what to say. But I have to say, I think equally important is for the parents to set a good example for their kids by not drinking to excess themselves. We know most binge drinking episodes in the United States actually involve adults, particularly those who are 26 and older. So talking to kids is important, but modeling good behavior is also very important too, and specifically not binge drinking.
So parents that see that might need to think, let me think about my own drinking and maybe rethink that. Sean, how about you? We're all parents here. Would you use a tool like that in your parenting?
Oh yeah, we, my wife I know has talked to my daughter and myself several times about the underage drinking, and just to add on to what Kara said, she's had her friends at the house, and they'll all three sit down and talk about it. It didn't have to be a threatening, in-depth conversation, just bringing it up, getting it out there that, hey, I don't want you out there drinking. It can cause all kinds of different problems, and it's been good so far.
That's good. We're awfully glad that those PSAs exist, and we're going to see another one later in our discussion. Let's talk a little bit about some more of those consequences. Bob, let's talk about the cost, the economic impact of alcohol. What do those numbers look like?
Well, they're huge. We estimate the economic cost of excessive drinking in the United States is on the order of about $224 billion, which if you do that on a per drink basis works out to about $1.90 per drink. So it's really a huge economic cost. And there's some variation across different states, but it's a very expensive problem everywhere. And there's a substantial proportion of those costs, upwards of $20 billion, and this is per year, that are related specifically to underage drinking. And a lot of those costs, by the way, are related to lost productivity, some of it having to do with the fact that people are dying in the prime of their lives. And if you're talking about underage drinking, it's even worse. They're dying before their lives really have started. And that's a huge economic cost to society, and in addition to the, of course, terrible tragic loss of life and illnesses that can result from excessive drinking too. So it's a very, very expensive problem.
And there are costs to law enforcement too, Sean. What do you think about in your own community, how much of an impact does alcohol play in your daily work as in law enforcement?
Oh, just on the daily work, it's a huge portion of it. I would say probably the majority of calls we go on with domestic assaults or any type of assault, whether it's domestic or otherwise, I would say the greatest portion of those calls are alcohol involved in some fashion. And that's generally with parents doing it in front of their kids, with the modeling Bob's been talking about. The kids are seeing that, and then with the prosecution end of it, the costs associated with that are going up all the time as well.
And what are some of those legal consequences, Sean, that can happen out of underage drinking?
Well, right now we're seeing the courts go with more of a diversionary type of program. They're trying to get the kids in front of teen courts so that they're basically in front of a jury of their peers, and they'll have representatives there for defense and prosecution, and it's all led by an attorney that oversees one of the programs, and just trying to keep them out of the adult judicial system, and the kids may still end up on probation and whatnot, but it's keeping them more out of the court system and trying to handle it at a lower level, so it's not something that's going to, I guess, be on their record forever.
And Kara, do you think that young people really understand the consequences of underage drinking?
After the fact, after they're caught, I think they do. As Sean alluded, when we look at diversionary programs, what we're trying to do is hopefully intercept some of these kids before they become heavier drinkers, heavier users, or unfortunately move on to other substances. We also need to remember, though, that some of these kids that are drinking as aggressively as they are have already developed or passed that threshold where there are some indicated services that are needed. I had a wise person one tell me that kids respond to time and money. So when we look at diversionary programs, it is a time-based program. It's a 10-week program that runs 2.5 hours every night. It is an education proportion that we like to spend time with them to make sure that we can weed out other issues that might be going on.
That's important for that relationship. And I'm wondering, Sean, too, what really happens when law enforcement busts a party? What happens to the young people?
Well, at the time, depending on whether they're 18, if they're 18 or over, they're basically cited and released. Over 18, they will go to adult court. They're not able to get into the diversionary programs. 18 and under, generally, any of them we catch, they'll all be PBT'd. They'll be taken down to the law enforcement.
PBT'd, you're going to have to use the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Given a preliminary breath test.
There you go.
And,
Thank you.
it reads hot for alcohol on their breath. They'll be taken down to the law enforcement center. We'll fill out juvenile petitions on all of them, and then we will call parents, and the parents will have to come pick them up. We can't turn them loose if they've been drinking, liability purposes. And if we can't contact parents, then they will go down to juvenile detention until a parent can be gotten in touch with to turn them over to somebody.
And what about any young people you might find at a party who are there's alcohol, but that kid's not drinking? How do you sort of make that determination?
Well, the law in South Dakota anyway is if they are in a place where alcohol is being served and consumed, technically they can be charged with underage possession and consumption. Predominantly what we try to do with the kids that are there and they're not drinking, we'll try to just cut them loose, because I mean they've made the right choice. I mean, they want to be with their friends at a social event, but they don't choose to drink, and we don't like to penalize them for that.
But they can have guilt by association here.
Yes,
parents need to know that, right?
Yes, they can.
And Kara, as a coalition leader, do you let the parents know about what might happen? I mean, do you talk to the parents about that?
Yeah, we do. And we've also been blessed with a Department of Corrections grant that allowed us to provide a prevention person in the school district. So we've been able to have a lot more of these conversations where we're able to educate parents about the law, and especially a brand new social host law that, parents can be held civilly responsible if something happens while a child is in their house under their care and consuming alcohol. So as a coalition member and a coalition leader for the last 10 years, times have really changed on the views with alcohol. And it's about educating parents, and it's about educating them that just because they're in your house doesn't mean they're safer.
Do we still say that alcohol is a gateway to other risky behavior? Do you have that conversation?
I do, and I would definitely agree that alcohol is probably one of the predominant gateway drugs out there.
And Bob, does the research bear that out?
Well, certainly we know that young people who drink, and again, most of them are binge drinking, most of them are drinking to get drunk, are much more likely to engage in a lot of other risky behaviors. One of the ones we haven't talked about yet that is certainly of great concern to many parents is sexual activity. And young people who've been drinking too much, and frankly adults too, often don't tend to make very responsible decisions about sexuality. And that, of course, can increase the risk of sexually transmitted diseases, but also the risk of pregnancy. And teen pregnancy is still a major concern in our country. And young people who get pregnant under the influence of alcohol, and particularly if they continue drinking, start to not only affect their own health, but also that of a developing infant too. So then you've got the whole legacy related to that underage drinking that doesn't just affect the individual, but affects many other people as well.
Absolutely. And what about something like alcohol poisoning that we hear a lot about? And any of you guys can share experiences with that, but what kind of a consequence is that in our community?
We locally had a partnership with law enforcement to do a saturation patrol that a young group of kids came through and were actually on their way to the emergency room to take a passenger who had consumed too much alcohol. And luckily law enforcement had stopped them there, was able to call the ambulance, was able to get this young man the help he needed. But I do believe, and all of our local surveys have shown the indication that when kids are choosing to drink, they're choosing to be pretty aggressive with their drinking. Their days of drinking may have decreased, but the amounts they're drinking is increasing. And then the fear that some of them do choose to get behind the wheel.
Right. And what about something of a Good Samaritan or amnesty law? Do you all have that in place?
That was actually brought to legislation a couple years ago in South Dakota, and I do believe it was defeated in legislation. There was just some concern with law enforcement or other protocol, what could happen, what would happen.
Bob, what about some other states? Do you know of these laws existing on the books?
Well, I think there are various approaches that have been taken to trying to inform people of some of the signs and symptoms of alcohol poisoning so that they can intervene and get somebody who may be at risk of poisoning death into treatment. But I think the key thing for people to be aware of, Mel, is we're talking about a problem that kills over 2,000 people in the United States per year, about 6 alcohol poisoning deaths specifically per day. And there's just a hand-in-glove relationship between alcohol poisoning and binge drinking. You don't die of alcohol poisoning unless you've been drinking a lot within a short period of time. That's how it happens. And that's an issue for young people, it's an issue for adults. And I think it really circles us back to the need to prevent binge drinking, and which again, as we've said before, is the dominant pattern of drinking in young people. And drinking at that level, 5 or more drinks on an occasion for a man, 4 or more for a girl, and particularly at the levels that, as Kara was saying, are often reported to us, upwards of 8 to 10 drinks per binge. At that level of consumption, you're really increasing the risk of alcohol poisoning.
So some folks might think that an amnesty or a Good Samaritan would be encouraging bad behavior, but it may be a public health strategy to save a life, right?
Yeah, I think to the extent we can go upstream and prevent people from drinking too much in the first place, then of course you can prevent the need for that intervention. And you know, one of the real problems, and this is true I think in a lot of rural states in particular, where we see very high rates of alcohol poisoning deaths, is people may drink a lot when they're by themselves and may not be discovered until sometime afterward.
All right, good information, guys. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit more about the conversations we need to have with our teens about alcohol. Here is another PSA from SAMHSA's Talk They Hear You campaign.
Oh, hey, bud.
Oh.
Where are you headed?
Just gonna hang out.
It's a school night. With Gary and Todd?
Yeah.
Not sure about those two. I've been meaning to ask you. This is tougher than I thought. Is there any drinking going on in this crowd?
No.
I hope not, because alcohol can lead you to say things and do things that you really wish you hadn't. Isn't this what you're supposed to say?
I know.
So if any of your buddies ever pressure you to take a drink, just tell them you promised your dad you wouldn't. I'd do anything to keep you safe.
Okay, I will.
I hope this is working.
I promise. Love you too, Dad.
They really do hear you.
Ryan.
Yeah?
So start the conversation even before they're teenagers.
Good idea.
For tips on what to say, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
All right, well, that message always gets me a little misty-eyed, right? The father and son talk. What did you guys think of that PSA? Sean?
That looked like a good PSA. You know, it's not just the mother out there talking to him about the underage drinking, that the father's involved as well, and hopefully he's taking some advice.
Yeah. What about that kind of messaging, Bob?
Well, again, I think it is important for parents to talk to their kids about alcohol. I think teaching them refusal skills can be helpful. But I have to come back to the issue of modeling. We know that binge drinking is about 3 times more common among adult men than it is women. And so I think the issue of parents setting a good example for their kids by not binge drinking is every bit, if not even more important, when you're talking about men. And I think the other message that parents really can play an important role in setting a good example for their kids is really very important as well. We sometimes downplay the role that we really have.
They're not powerless, right? And Kara, what about the age that's appropriate? They say talk early and often. Is that what you would tell your parents in your coalition?
That's exactly what I would tell my parents in the coalition. And also the second guessing yourself, the conversation he was having in his head, I kind of chuckled because I thought, I've even had that conversation. You know, I hope this is working. I hope this is the right, you know, but we have to remember that any discussions we have are better than no discussions.
Right. Well, what about the relationships that we have? When we talk about solutions, of course, having conversations are important, but there's a lot of other strategies that coalitions employ beyond media. And one of them, of course, is key is partnerships. And we have you two here, great example from Sturgis about a partnership. Can you talk a little bit about the coalition partnership with law enforcement?
Yes, the partnership started, I've been in my position 10 years, and someone had set me up with a meeting to meet the chief of police. And I'm going to share this story because it happened, and I think it steered me in the direction the coalition took. And I remember telling the chief of police that I was going to abolish the Sturgis motorcycle rally. And he politely shook my hand and said, "It's very nice to meet you and have a good day." You know, not knowing, oh my goodness, this young lady is in here truly thinking, doesn't understand the magnitude of this impact of this rally. After that, lots of meetings, lots of conversations, and a simple, what can we do to help each other is the most crucial way to approach any partnership. I think as prevention people, sometimes we can get caught up in thinking we're the experts and we know everything. I'm not the expert when it comes to law enforcement and dealing with younger kids and juveniles who are causing problems in the community. I then give the courtesy to law enforcement to lead that discussion, and how as a coalition can we partner and help make this a better community for all of us.
And Sean, how about you? How important is law enforcement to be engaged in this coalition?
Oh, I think it's a good portion of it. You know, our chief has always been very involved with the community, and a community-oriented chief, excuse me. And he's really had the buy-in to get us into the coalition, as well as taking it to the city council, city manager, to let us do the things we do with the coalition. And then Kara making the inroads with the city council and the city manager as well to get their name out there and what they do, and to be able to work together on the juvenile issues we have just been huge for the community.
Absolutely. Well, you guys are obviously great partners, and we know when coalitions work together, they can do great things. Let's see what the Linked Together Coalition in Illinois has accomplished.
In Illinois' Wheeling Township, just northwest of Chicago, 156,000 people live in 5 separate communities. The Linked Together Coalition unites them all and has a mission.
We need to prevent underage drinking for so many reasons. These are the future leaders of our communities. We want people to understand that these kids are going to be our future mayors, our future police officers, and we want to give them the best opportunity to have a successful life. We're really excited about the numbers that we've seen since our programs have been put in place. We've actually seen a 10% decrease in 30-day alcohol use in our teens.
Each municipality has its own police department, but they all work together with the coalition for the common goal.
It doesn't work unless you're invested. And we are invested in this program. We are invested to work with the coalition because we know we can make a difference. We know we can show a reduction in the number of offenses. We've proven that. We know that we can work with parents, schools, and we can work with the students to have what our goal is prevention in the first place.
A key to their success has been the implementation and enforcement of social host ordinances.
Social hosting is when parents provide a location for their underage teen to provide alcohol to their friends. One of the things we're trying to do is to publicize and make the community aware, A, that is illegal behavior, educate the community on why that's a bad idea, and all the reasons why we as parents shouldn't do that.
If there's a party, underage drinking party in your house, whether you know it or not, whether you, for instance, a parent can be on vacation and leave their 15, 16, 17-year-old home alone, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, it's not illegal. If a kid's gonna have a party, we wanna let the parent know that when you're away, if your son or daughter has a party and somebody gets hurt or killed, you're responsible for that. And you could be arrested, up to a felony charge.
We're able to hold the parents accountable for having these parties at their house. Sometimes parents feel like, let's just have them at our house. We can take the keys from them, we can monitor it, we can have a controlled situation. But unfortunately, it's hard to control every kid that's at that party.
I've heard over and over again, you know, sir, if my kid's gonna do it, I'd rather him do it home where I know where he's safe. And I'd rather have his friends here instead of somewhere I don't know. You're accepting that your son or daughter is drinking illegally. So you're saying to your kid, that's okay, you're breaking the law, but that's okay. So I lose a little respect from a parent who's telling me that, yeah, I'm gonna let my kid break the law, it's no big deal.
Simply having a social host law on the books does not mean adults know about it.
Ma'am, social hosting and providing alcohol to teens is against the law.
We have been getting the word out to our teens and our parents through our schools, through our community partners. We most recently had a public service announcement that was developed by 5 of our police departments that we're very excited about. It's been shared on our partners' websites, through social media, local cable channels. It's been very, very well received, and it sends that message to parents that it's very important that they understand that social hosting is dangerous and illegal, and they should not be providing alcohol to minors.
Several liquor stores have also helped spread the message by participating in the Coalition's campaign called Your Actions Matter.
We go out and put the hangers on the bottles and the cabinet, the displays, and maybe that'll spark someone to say, what is that? What's that about? And
so when somebody comes in and they see this Your Action Matters tag, it's kind of a reminder, hey, just because you're an adult and you think it's okay to monitor and buy alcohol for the juvenile, we discourage it, and that kind of action is not going to be accepted in our town or the surrounding towns who also participate in this. And then we also put up some flyers within their stores as well, so when people walk around, they can see this information.
The teens are the messengers, going into the stores and talking to salespeople and to each other.
it's good for them to be role models to themselves and to their other peers. So if they, hey, this is what I was doing, why would you want to do that? Because it's important. It may just sway one other person to say, you know what, if they're strong enough to stand up for what they believe in, maybe I can do that too. So they can influence each other. It's a good thing for them.
Social norms campaigns are now a big part of the landscape, both in and around area schools. It's all about peer pressure working in a positive way.
Well, a lot of students hear kids talking about things that take place on the weekend, and so they start to overgeneralize that everybody is doing these things on a weekend. So there may have been a party where there are 15 or 20 kids at the party and they were drinking or using drugs, and they're talking about that, and they come back and they start talking about it within the school building, and then all of a sudden the rumors start to spread. Did you know how many kids were at parties this weekend? And they start to overgeneralize the whole fact of how many kids are really out there partying every weekend. So we are actually looking at the difference between kids' perceptions and actual use. Because a lot of kids think everybody's using, but when we actually interview students and we do surveys with students, the Illinois Youth Survey, we find out that that's not the case. The majority of our kids are not using, and yet that message doesn't get out, and all the kids think everybody is. So when you go around our building, you see these posters that talk about, did you know that so many students at Buffalo Grove High School are not using drugs, right? Because we want to get a positive message out to kids. We don't want kids to think that everybody uses, because they don't.
The coalition's success is based on partnerships and consistent messaging.
Yeah, it's not just school or church or the police or doctors or social workers. It's all of us working together to make a difference, because then it creates an environment and an atmosphere of this is the positive health choice that we're making for ourselves and for our community.
Even though Linked Together has had tremendous success, it wants to do even more to help teens stay away from alcohol.
Drinking does not have to be part of high school, and that's something that we're really working hard to reinforce. That would be the result of one bad choice could alter the rest of their life, their family's life, and the lives of all their friends in the entire community.
All right. That piece brought up a lot of strategies when we talk about solutions, and we know coalitions need to do a number of strategies. We talked about social host norming in there, some point of sale type messaging going on. There's a lot there. Mm-hmm. What about this social host law piece? A lot of coalitions are looking into it. Is it something that you have in your community, Kara?
As I shared earlier, we are just past the last couple years. So we're in, it passed this last year. So we are in the implementation phase of it. And as I say, with any law that's on the books, unless somebody's enforcing it and making sure that everyone goes through that court process, laws on the books without the partners to enforce it don't necessarily do us any good. And so when we look at social hosts, it's really getting the information out there. I loved in that piece they did that even if you're not home and your child decides to have a party, how the negative consequences can roll up into something that ends up making you in a criminal case.
Sean, what kind of information would your law enforcement officers need to go forward with the social host case?
Well, now that it's on the books, we just need to have officers enforcing it. What we used to do before we had these laws, we did have a law in the books which was maintaining a common nuisance, where if we had a house that repeatedly was having alcohol parties with minors there, after so many times of being there, we could arrest the owner of the residence for maintaining a common nuisance. But now with this social hosting law, we can actually, even with the kids now, go after the parents when, if the parents are gone. And that's something they need to be aware of when they're gone, and have somebody responsible keeping an eye on those kids, or have their kids staying with another responsible family while you're gone.
And some of this goes back to access and availability for young people, right, Bob? I mean, this is about alcohol being in a home, being accessible, and tying that back to some pretty serious consequences for parents.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as we've talked about previously, many young people, most young people report that they're getting alcohol from adults who are purchasing it for them or giving it to them. That's particularly true of young people who are binge drinking, which, as we've also pointed out previously, is most. There's a lot of research going on around social norming or social hosting programs specifically, and I think it looks to be a promising strategy. There's more that we have to learn. It does conceptually parallel another strategy that we know does work, which is holding retailers accountable for harms related to their selling to people that they shouldn't, particularly underage youth and also people who are intoxicated. So I think there's certainly reason to believe that those kind of policies can help to set an environment that encourage people to do the right thing. And in the case of social hosting laws, for parents to not serve kids and to not host underage drinking parties in their home.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the commercial hosting laws. Tell us a little bit more. I know that there's another term for it, dram shop liability, which sounds strange to a lot of folks. So tell us about what we might call commercial host liability.
Well, really, Mel, I think commercial host liability is part of a whole constellation of strategies that have to do with trying to create a retail environment that encourages retailers to do the right thing, to not serve to underage youth, to not serve to people who are intoxicated. Serving to underage youth is illegal in all states, and serving to people who are intoxicated is certainly illegal in most. Nonetheless, we know, unfortunately, that both of those behaviors do go on, and commercial host then, or dram shop liability, is yet again another layer in that process, if you will. And it's saying if you disobey the law, then you're going to be held accountable. And if something bad happens, then you in turn, the owner of a retail establishment, or in the case of social host, a parent, can be held accountable. And I think that's fair. And the science says that in the case of commercial host liability in particular, it can work. And particularly work in reducing the risk of, for example, motor vehicle crashes and motor vehicle crash deaths.
You mentioned science. Kara, how important is it that you're using science-based strategies as a coalition leader?
Science-based strategies had made us that much more successful. We are a state that does not have a dram shop law. And so I know when we began doing compliance checks 3 years ago, we had a lot of kickback from, our poor police chief took a lot of kickback. Negative impact from business owners saying, you're going to drive my business away. You know, the more we do these compliance checks, you know, there was this fear that it would decrease business for them. You know, and after looking at and educating these business owners on the positives about making sure that these people aren't getting in their vehicles, going down the street and causing accidents that impact many of us, to just make sure that everyone understands that a lot of this stuff is done for the community instead of just to making sure that this is done because we're singling out your business.
We talk about compliance checks. Is that an opportunity for the coalition and law enforcement to work together in tandem? Or how does that work? Sean?
Yeah, we have officers that go out, and we have a youth go in and attempt to purchase alcohol in establishments, and we regularly have businesses that will sell to the youth.
Well, you guys have a special environment in Sturgis, and we talked about it a little bit at the top of the program, of how your community might change during the year. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think some of the strategies that we're talking about now, you're applying in your community. So what happens when this bike rally comes to town, Kara?
When this bike rally comes to town, imagine having a square mile of a town that hosts 6,500 people during the normal time of the year, that then, I don't want to say squashes, but does squash over 500,000 people into this same area for about 10 days. A lot of the time, I do believe that the rally takes a little bit of the negative impact, where we have a lot of these problems with youth and underage drinking all year round. However, it's a little easier to notice that when there's that many more people, that many more law officers in town, to then be able to initiate contact with minors. Some of the things that we have that come around during the motorcycle rally are a lot of loot activities. We have a lot of access for youth to alcohol who are working in different locations. And I don't believe it's maliciously done by business owners, but it's just a matter of if a 15-year-old or 16-year-old is working at clearing tables, bussing tables, that they have a little easier access to alcohol than they might at any other time of the year when the business isn't at capacity and people are coming in and out.
And Sean, what about for law enforcement? Do your strategies change during the rally?
Well, we're visible during the rally. You know, we have so many more people in town and have so many more issues going on. We certainly don't focus on underage consuming in any way. We do see, you know, an increase generally in DUI traffic with all the alcohol being consumed during that time. With Highway Patrol comes in to help out. You know, we have some government agencies in, but we do see DUI and you know, just basically unsafe driving, alcohol related during that time is a pretty big issue.
Another strategy I know, Bob, that we look at is alcohol outlet density, the number of establishments, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I wonder if our folks here from Sturgis could talk about the density of the outlets in your community. What do you see? Sean, what do you see?
Well, we have about, what did you say, 26?
To 30.
To 30.
On and off.
On and off that go to campgrounds during the rally. You have 7 or 8 bars in town, and they're packed. I mean, we have a couple of bars that are a block long, and they're open basically, well, not 24 hours a day, but they shut at 2 in the morning. But they're busy all day, and there's just so many people there that I don't know that you could fit another person in any of those bars half the time.
And what about, Bob, what we know from the research about that dense environment and its impact?
Well, I think at a big picture level, Mel, what we know is that if alcohol is more available, people tend to drink more. And when you have a high concentration of bars and other retail establishments within a small geographic area, you've got the issue not only of greater availability, but you tend to get more competition between retailers, which can sometimes drive the price down. And you also just get a congregation of a lot of people who've been drinking a lot. And that, unfortunately, for some, not all, can increase the risk of violence. And that's one of the outcomes that is most closely associated with having high alcohol outlet density. The good news is that by putting some reasonable controls on the concentration of retail alcohol outlets within a small geographic area that has high density, you can really reduce violent crime as well. And there have been some very positive success stories of where coalitions have worked together with city government, very much with police, to reduce alcohol outlet density and in turn reduce violent crime.
That's good. Kara, as a parent and as a coalition leader, what do families who live in Sturgis do during this time?
Most families, as we stated earlier, they do leave the area. A lot of families rent out their houses during this time, have people who are coming for the enjoyment of the motorcycle rally, who vacate and they actually take over their house during that week, and most families leave the area. We do have some youth, though I will have to say that it is a good job to have for those 10 days. Whether you're cleaning up campgrounds, you're t-shirt vending, different things where that economic boost that these kids can get is also something that is pretty important to the youth in the area.
Yeah. We should also say too, I mean, Sturgis is not unique. There are a lot of communities in our country that change by the season. There are beach towns and there are spring break towns, and people that are the residents of those communities year-round, and the coalition leaders and law enforcement, they need to adjust and be ready for what's coming out, because the environment is so key to all of this. How does that environment look? Bob, we're talking about some of these strategies, and I wonder if you could just share with everyone sort of why CDC is so concerned about excessive drinking and sort of these strategies and where people can find them.
Well, as I think we've talked about a bit during the program so far, Mel, excessive alcohol use, broadly defined, has a huge public health impact. So as a public health agency, we're concerned because we know that drinking too much kills about 88,000 people in the United States each year, and about 1 in 10 deaths among working age adults, people in the prime of their lives, are due to alcohol. As we've pointed out previously, alcohol is directly related to the 3 most common causes of death among young people: motor vehicle crashes, homicide, suicide. So there's a huge health impact related to excessive drinking, and it's also very expensive, $224 billion a year. And many of those costs, by the way, are paid for by all of us. Government shoulders a lot of those costs. About 2 out of every 5 of those dollars are paid for by government,
and what about
including
the
law
strategies?
enforcement.
What about the strategies, though? Where can we go to find sort of the blessed list of strategies that we should be focusing maybe most of our attention on?
Well, certainly for us, the Bible, when it comes to identifying evidence-based strategies, is the community guide. And the community guide and the task force for community preventive services has been involved in reviewing what the science tells us about what works. And there are a number of different high-impact strategies recommended by the Community Preventive Services Task Force. Some of them we've talked about: commercial holstered dram shop liability, regulating alcohol outlet density. One we haven't touched on relates to increasing alcohol taxes. Alcohol consumption is very sensitive to price. And I think conversely, we have to say that one of the reasons why young people tend to drink a lot is because by and large alcohol tends to be cheap, readily available, and heavily advertised. So the kind of strategies that can work to reduce underage drinking and excessive drinking in the population as a whole often need to touch on exactly those issues. Is alcohol being priced fairly, commensurate with the social cost? Are we putting reasonable controls on alcohol availability, and are we holding retailers accountable for whether they're obeying the law? Those, in a nutshell, are some of the key things that the science tells us can work.
And I wanted to ask about the hours of operation, because you mentioned sort of what time the bars close and open again, and ask Sean if that has an impact on your community.
Yeah, our bars are open, I believe, from 8 a.m. till 2 in the morning. They used to close at midnight on Sundays, but now they're open till 2 on Sundays as well. As far as the impact on the community, it's just more hours for them to be in the bar. I mean, those that are there regularly are going to be there. So.
And what about price and cost? I mean, Kara, do you guys look at that as a coalition leader as something to consider in your community?
Price is crucial. I believe that a lot of youth who choose to drink many times pool their money together, whether they buy the most expensive alcohol or the cheapest alcohol. Even if we can look at trying to find the ability to increase taxes, to look at helping some of these enforcement issues, some of these prevention issues, some of these different government entities or workplaces that are burdened with this billion-dollar impact that alcohol has. The state of South Dakota, 24% of the alcohol consumed is done illegally by youth under the age of 21. And so when we look at the tax impact, their taxes, many of them don't work, aren't going to any of the deterrent of these issues. So yes, I believe locally tax increases could be a deterrent, and a positive one, especially if it helps promote other programs to help.
The other piece that was tackled in our coalition in Illinois was this idea of social norming. And with the rally, I'm sure folks feel like, Sturgis might be like that 24/7 year-round, but that's not the norm, right?
No. Sturgis is quite a quaint little community. 6,500 people, has the best business community we could have. I think we are second to none with our partners, with our school district and law enforcement. We're asked all the time, how does it work? It just has come so naturally for us to build each other up and work together than to try to make each other enemies. We're here for the the underlying issue of we all care about these kids. We all want these kids to be successful, productive adults.
And when it's non-rally time, how do you use social norming in your community?
We have an extremely active youth leadership team that are in our middle school and our high school. And Deidre Avery has been an absolutely amazing asset and mouthpiece for us with the school system. We have youth that go out and do the above the influence, tag it activity. There's a lot of things that us as parents we overlook. The impact that when you look at billboards driving down the interstate, you get into the localization of the town, the actual impact of alcohol advertising that all of our youth have seen, that have just grown up with that. Where sports activities even on television have become more integrated with alcohol promotions and different things, where most of us have kind of become immune to that the older we get. So really allowing those kids to recognize how media and the ability for them to see the majority of these kids aren't making those decisions. That we always call it the 80-20 rule. We spend the majority of our time with that 20% when 80% of them really aren't having that problem.
You mentioned advertising, and I think that's another point to consider for the coalition, for the community. What role does advertising play in underage drinking?
I think it plays a crucial role, and there's a lot of scientific evidence showing that young people who are exposed to alcohol advertising, particularly at higher levels, are more likely to start drinking and more likely to drink more if they do. And I think it's also, Mel, part of the very mixed messages that young people get. We're all talking as adults who've been directly involved in dealing with underage drinking about the health problems related to this behavior and the long-term consequences it can have. At the same time, young people are exposed to advertising and to videos that often communicate to them that drinking is part of having a good time and part of being cool. And I think we have to be aware of the fact that those mixed messages can really put kids at increased risk of drinking and drinking to excess.
So, Kara, do we try to counter those advertisements with some of your own, or what do you guys do about this?
I think there's a crucial piece we miss. We miss the reality of the internet. And youth's access to social media and the involvement of being able to just look at a computer and check any advertising they want. Do we look locally at trying to make sure signs go down quickly after rally and to really make sure that the promotion of alcohol advertising isn't carried out after those 10 days? Yes, we do. Sturgis has a sign committee that makes sure that everything isn't lewd or indecent and that the youth aren't exposed to these after the 10 days that the rally's in town. So counter advertising, I think we've tried a lot in the past, but with the explosion of social media, I think we kind of take for granted the amount of negative advertising youth see every day when they're on Twitter, social media, Facebook, different things like that.
I think media literacy plays a role here, doesn't it? Because when we talk to and engaging young people about what they're seeing, and that this is an advertisement, someone's trying to sell you something. Is that a science-based strategy, sort of teaching young people from the public health perspective to know what's coming at them?
Well, I think media literacy is part of the picture, but I think to get to Kara's point, we have to look at the proliferation of alcohol advertising in the media that young people are seeing. Certainly the internet is a big area of concern, but television. We've seen a real ramping up of alcohol advertising on cable television, for example. And I think it's crucial that in that case the industry be held accountable for the extent to which they're complying with their own voluntary standards of not placing advertising on programs that have large youth audiences.
I can't believe it, but we have time for final thoughts now. This has been a great dialogue. If you wanted to just leave the folks at home with something, what would be the one thing that you would want to share, Sean?
Just to the parents, hold your kids accountable, and hopefully they will be accountable to you. Make sure they know where they're going, you know where they're going, what they're doing, and who they're with.
Kara?
Mine would be to make sure you build each other up as partners. We aren't strong without each other, and we each play such a different role in that community that if we can align and work together as a team, we're a lot more successful.
Bob, brief final thought?
I would just leave the audience with the realization that hopefully they already have that excessive drinking and specifically underage drinking is a huge public health problem. But the good news is we have effective strategies to prevent it. The issue is we're not using them as much as we could, and that's what I think the real challenge is.
And that's what a program like this hopefully will inspire folks to do. So thank you all. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of Bob Brewer, Kara Graveman, Sean Briscoe, I'm Mary Elizabeth Elliott. Thank you for watching The Sobering Consequences of Underage Drinking.